local reactions to the renaming and preservation of the original name. During the colonial period, local African perspectives had little influence on official naming. The colonial authorities and white settlers predominantly used Victoria Falls, and this remained the case into the mid-20th century. However, with the rise of African nationalism and eventually the independence of Zambia, 1964, and Zimbabwe, 1980, there was a renewed appreciation of indigenous heritage and a questioning of colonial names. Historically, local people always remembered and used the name Mosi-Oa-Tunya. Nationalist leaders in Zambia and Zimbabwe, as part of broader efforts to reclaim African identity, such as renaming Northern Rhodesia to Zambia and Southern Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, also highlighted indigenous names of landmarks. For instance, after Zambian independence, the government maintained the name Mosi-Oa-Tunya for the national park and promoted the use of that name alongside Victoria Falls. In 1989, when the falls were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the official listing recognized both names, Mosi-Oa-Tunya, Victoria Falls. This was an important symbolic acknowledgement on an international stage that the waterfall's heritage is shared. It is not only a monument to Victorian-era exploration, but first and foremost a natural and cultural treasure of African people. In Zimbabwe, after independence in 1980, there was an extensive campaign to replace colonial names. Cities like Salisbury became Harare, Fort Victoria became Masvingo, etc. The name Victoria Falls, however, was so globally entrenched and economically tied to tourism that it was retained for official usage, though always with awareness of its colonial origin. Over the years, there have been calls by some Zimbabwean officials and citizens to give the falls an indigenous name officially. In 2013, for example, Zimbabwe's ruling party resolved that iconic sites with colonial names should be renamed in honor of local heroes or heritage. Some suggested that Victoria Falls be renamed Mosi-Oa-Tunya, arguing that David Livingstone was not the first to see the falls, and thus it was only right to restore the original name. David Livingstone was not the first person to see the Victoria Falls. They must be rebranded Mosi-Oa-Tunya, declared one war veterans leader during these discussions. The proposal sparked debate. Local reaction was mixed. Many Zimbabweans take pride in the name Mosi-Oa-Tunya and its meaning, seeing it as part of their cultural identity that survived colonialism. Others, especially in the tourism sector, were concerned that a name change could cause confusion or reduce the international recognition that Victoria Falls enjoys. The Zimbabwean government's own tourism minister at the time, Walter Mazembe, downplayed the issue, noting that the falls already effectively had a double-barrel name and that the focus should be on celebrating the heritage while keeping the tourist brand strong. Indeed, in practice, both names are often used side by side in Zimbabwe and Zambia. One finds plaques, museums, and guides referencing Mosi-Oa-Tunya as well as Victoria Falls. Local languages, Chitanga, Lozi, Ndebele, etc., naturally use their traditional terms in everyday conversation, ensuring the original names are preserved orally. On the Zambian side, there has generally been more consistent use of the name Mosi-Oa-Tunya in official nomenclature. For example, Mosi-Oa-Tunya National Park, and even a Zambian brewed beer is named Mosi Lager in honor of the falls. The city of Livingstone, Zambia, despite bearing Livingstone's name, has embraced its proximity to Mosi-Oa-Tunya as part of its identity, often educating visitors about the meaning of the local name. Zambia and Zimbabwe jointly manage the World Heritage Site, and both countries acknowledge the paramount significance of the site to local cultures. In recent years, heritage conservation efforts have also meant engaging local communities in tourism and interpretation, which naturally brings indigenous stories and names to the fore. Modern visitors will frequently hear that they are seeing Mosi-Oa-Tunya, the smoke that thunders, in addition to the colonial name. This represents a form of cultural restoration, a recognition that the waterfall's identity does not belong exclusively to the colonial past or to Queen Victoria's legacy, but even more so to the people who for generations have called it by names born of observation, reverence, and myth. In summary, the name Victoria Falls, as bestowed by Livingstone, honored a British monarch, but to the peoples of the area, the falls has always been and remains Mosi-Oa-Tunya, the smoke that thunders. The two names each carry histories, one of indigenous significance and one of colonial encounter. Local reaction over time has moved from acquiescence during colonial rule to reassertion of the original name in the post-colonial era, driven by both national pride and cultural preservation. While Victoria Falls remains the internationally known term and is unlikely to disappear due to its global familiarity, there is today widespread appreciation for the original African name. Educational signs and guides often mention the Mosi-Oa-Tunya name and its meaning, ensuring that visitors from around the world learn about the waterfall's African identity. Some scholars have even described the dominance of the name Victoria Falls as something of a colonial impudence, an imposition on a deeply African phenomenon, and argue that the poetic Mosi-Oa-Tunya is far more appropriate for a wonder of nature in independent Zambia and Zimbabwe. Regardless, both governments and UNESCO recognize the dual name, reflecting a reconciliatory approach to history. Victoria Falls is entrenched on maps and in literature, but Mosi-Oa-Tunya lives on not only in local tongues but also increasingly in official and international usage. Conclusion. The story of Victoria Falls' name is a microcosm of African colonial history. The waterfall's original names, Mosi-Oa-Tunya, Shungu Namutitima, and others, sprang from local languages, capturing the wonder it inspired in those who lived alongside it and weaving the site into local spiritual life. European exploration brought a new name, Victoria Falls, which for a time eclipsed the originals on the world stage and became enmeshed with the narratives of empire, exploration, and commerce, exemplified by Livingstone's chronicles and Rhodes's railway bridge. Yet the cultural resilience of the indigenous peoples ensured that the original name was never lost. Through mythology, oral tradition, and now heritage conservation, Mosi-Oa-Tunya remains a living title for this natural wonder, just as the falls remain a living sacred landscape. Today, anyone who stands before the Cascades and feels the earth tremble with the thundering water, or watches the plume of spray rise to the sky, can understand why the ancestors named it the smoke that thunders. And by learning the name Mosi-Oa-Tunya, one also acknowledges the rich tapestry of indigenous African history and culture that is inseparable from the identity of Victoria Falls. As one crosses the border bridge or reads the plaques in the parks, the dual nomenclature serves as a reminder that this majestic waterfall carries layered meanings. It is at once a World Heritage Site known globally as Victoria Falls and a revered ancient site known locally as Mosi-Oa-Tunya, and its full story cannot be told without both. Sources: Livingstone, David, Missionary Travels and Researches in South Africa, 1858, first-hand account of the discovery and naming of Victoria Falls. Victorian-era maps and records referencing Mosi-Oa-Tunya and local names: Coillard, F. 1878. Diary excerpt on indigenous ceremonies at the falls. Tonga and Lozi oral traditions and cultural descriptions via Zambia Tourism, Victoria Falls Guide, etc. on the spiritual significance and legends of the falls. Zimbabwean and Zambian heritage management sources including UNESCO World Heritage Center documentation and contemporary news on proposals to officially rename the falls. Historical analyses of British colonial expansion, British South Africa Company records, and Cecil Rhodes' involvement with Victoria Falls, bridge construction accounts. Siabona Africa and Victoria Falls Guide compilations on the history and cultural context of Victoria Falls, highlighting the enduring appropriateness of the name, the smoke that thunders. Learn more about art, history, and music at Oran's Books. Comrades, please like and subscribe, and may the rest of your life be the best of your life. Oranzi Belgrave.